Hi, thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Grace Woodward, and I'm the Professional Development and Outreach Assistant for Maryland History Day here at Maryland Humanities. So, today I'm going to talk a little bit about evaluating History Day projects and also celebrating student work. And I think those two things really go hand in hand. I like to talk about them together because I like to think about how can we help our students understand where they've done awesome jobs in their History Day projects, where they still have room to improve, how can we help them prepare for judging and the different parts of um, History Day contests if that's something they're interested in participating in. But then, more importantly to me at least, is how can we celebrate student work? How can we really remind students that they did an awesome job and show that we appreciate all the effort that they put into their History Day projects? So that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about and brainstorming with y'all a little bit today. Awesome. So let's get started. So, in Maryland History Day, we are constantly thinking about what it means to support student work, what it means to evaluate projects, what it means to support students. Um, and some of those questions end up looking a little bit like this, right? How do we assess student projects? How can we support teachers and community members as they assess student projects and offer feedback to students? So that's both as teachers in the classroom and also as judges at contests at either school level or district level competitions. And then also, how can we encourage students to reflect on their projects and work to improve them? One of the things we really value in History Day and really in all project based learning are those kinds of ideas about self reflection and self assessment and working to improve. And then, how can we make evaluations as equitable and inclusive as possible? So, how can we make them as fair, as just, as even for all of our different students who participate in History Day? And so, as I'm thinking about all these questions and kind of raising them with y'all and talking to you a little bit about how we've been thinking about these, I also want to make it clear that I think National History Day has been going through some of these same questions. And it's kind of led them to create a new evaluation. So, there was a new set of evaluations made for the 2021 History Day contest. And those new evaluations, they were made for judges as they evaluate History Day projects at different levels of the History Day contest. We also like to have them kind of be available for teachers to use in your History Day classroom, but we know a lot of teachers make their own rubrics as well. So that's also always fine. Um, but we want to show you a little bit about what that kind of evaluation process looks like and what are some of the new pieces of the evaluation that are really important to answering some of these questions about how we make students the best historians they can be and how we make evaluations as equitable and inclusive as possible. So here's kind of a zoom into an example of what the new evaluations look like. And we're looking at kind of the bulk of the evaluation. It's an 80% of the grade or the score, however you want to think about it, um, goes toward historical quality. And there's a couple things I want to bring your attention to. The first thing is this 80%, 20% breakdown. So we've got 80% historical quality, and we've got 20% for clarity of presentation. I'm going to pull up that clarity of presentation in a little bit, but for right now, I want to focus on historical quality because it's really where we get the bulk of that History Day project analysis or project evaluation. All right. So the next thing I want to bring your attention to is student voice and multiple perspectives. So you can see student voice all the way at the bottom. That's saying student ideas, analysis, argument, and conclusions are original and persuasive. So I think this one is really important. It means that students are speaking in their own voice, they're communicating their own ideas. So it kind of touches on avoiding some um, maybe like avoiding plagiarism or avoiding students kind of copying the analysis or the work of others. But to me, that's the less important part. To me, the most important part is the ideas that students are really engaging in original analysis and ideas. And that kind of framing of a student as an expert, a student who's someone who's capable and able to have these interesting analysis and ideas and arguments is really important to what we kind of look for in this project-based learning approach. And the next thing I want to bring up is multiple perspectives. So when we're looking at multiple perspectives, you can see it kind of in the middle there. And a project that really incorporates multiple perspectives is going to integrate multiple perspectives throughout the historical argument. So that means that multiple perspectives, they're not just going to get a quick second, or they're not just going to be one blurb or one sentence. It's going to be really fully um, explored throughout the entirety of the History Day project. So, just like I kind of showed you, another thing that this evaluation really does that's a little different is that the criteria for what it means to be on that scale from fair to superior is much more clearly explained. And so that does a couple of things, right? It helps our students set more clear goals and helps our students have a little bit of a better understanding of what's expected of them in these different kinds of categories. And it also helps give judges and teachers a little bit of a better sense of where they might want to put students, where they might want to grade students' work on this scale. So it helps them give really clear and hopefully more fair interpretations of their evaluation on a History Day project. All right. And then I've got this next thing pulled up real quick, and that's just a little bit of the clarity of presentation. I'm not going to go into that too much right now. If you want to pause and take a look, you're welcome to do so. But it's kind of the smaller piece of the project. The technical, the audio, the visual, that kind of stuff falls under clarity of presentation. Awesome. So the first thing I want to think about today is encouraging student voice. We've talked about student voice a little bit, but basically student voice refers to students' ideas and analysis. Students' arguments and students' supporting analysis must be clear in students' projects. So, you're getting a lot of that student, that voice. It's really about thinking about students taking on complex ideas and students leading the charge when it comes to their History Day projects. So student voice, it values student research, ideas, and opinions. It gives students a chance to be the expert, and it gives us a chance to learn from our students. Project-based learning is most successful when students are the drivers, as they actively engage in real-world and personally meaningful projects. So I like to think about student voice as, it allows students to be the expert. It allows students to fill really big shoes and say, I've got my own ideas and analysis, and my own ideas and analysis have value. So that's one of the things I really love about student voice, and something that I think the History Day project can do really well. So how do we help students use their voice? How do we help students find this voice, right? We talked about why it's kind of great, why it's important, but encouraging student voice is a practice that can be woven into classrooms really at all levels and really throughout the entire classroom culture. So planning consistent opportunities for students to speak up and share their thoughts and opinions, things like morning meetings or journaling, peer editing, think, pair, shares, all of those things can kind of help encourage student voice and give students opportunities to speak up. Other ways we can encourage students to use their voice are asking students about their lives and interests beyond the classroom. We can ask for feedback from students and use it. And we can kind of remember that student choice really leads to student voice. So the way I like to think about that is it kind of connects to History Day throughout the whole time, throughout the whole project, right? We ask students to choose their own topics and pursue their own interests, student choice leading to student voice. We ask students to think about their lives and interests beyond the classroom, thinking about how does their present day and the things they understand contemporarily connect to the History Day project they're doing. And at the end of our History Day sessions in the classrooms, we can ask for students what really worked for you about this project, what went well, or what did you hate and wish you never had to do again. So we can listen to all of these awesome things that students come up with, and those kinds of things are going to happen throughout the History Day process. So thinking a little bit more about how students use their voice in History Day projects, I talked a little bit about how student voice can kind of happen in the classroom, but how exactly does it happen in a History Day project? So the way I like to think about that is that students incorporate student voice into History Day projects by distinguishing their own analysis, arguments, opinions, and ideas from the sources or research that they've done. So there's a couple of things that kind of connect to this. There's a student composed word count requirement. So if you have an exhibit, students can put as many quotes as they want. But the really thing that we look for, that thing that we really count, are those student composed words. So kind of addresses some extra value to that student composed word count. Inquiry into student questions. So when students are coming up with their own questions and working to answer them, they're also getting to have a little bit of help in thinking about their own ideas, their own analysis. And then the biggest thing that I think can help a student use their voice in their History Day projects is primary sources, right? Secondary sources might give students some of the some of the answers, they're going to be super useful in helping students understand a little bit more about context. But where students are really going to be able to do their own analysis, come up with their own ideas, is by really digging into those primary sources, asking questions about how do I think this person felt, or what do I think these words mean, or why do I think this poster was made. Those are all the ways that primary sources can really help students insert their voice into their History Day projects. All right, so I talked a little bit about student voice, and now I want to jump into another part of that evaluation sheet that I talked about earlier, and that's multiple perspectives. Appreciating multiple perspectives is incredibly important, right? A perspective is one point of view, a person's experience, or just one side of the story. And when we think about multiple perspectives, it's really thinking bigger than that. It's expanding to a more complex understanding of history. It's one of the most difficult parts of history, and it's something that professional historians really struggle with as well. That's something I really like to remind students, right? They might be struggling with multiple perspectives, but so is everyone. So are all different kinds of historians. Historians have really been struggling with this for a long time. And just recently, I think professional historians are starting to do a little bit of a better job of really thinking about those multiple perspectives. So, multiple perspectives, it's it can accomplish a lot of things in the classroom, right? It can include neglected perspectives and help all of our students see themselves in history. It can teach students that historical events have multiple perspectives and multiple layers. And it can teach students to critically evaluate sources by asking things like who's not included here, who's missing from this story, or how might different people feel about this source. So, multiple perspectives and appreciating those multiple perspectives have a lot of huge benefits. And so, how do we include those multiple perspectives in History Day projects? There's a couple kinds of ways that I like to think about it, right? We ask critical questions of our sources. So, that's like a question I just posed, right? Who's missing from this source? What different kind of people do I see in this source? How might different people feel about this? We as teachers and educators can work on our own historical biases so we can better assist students, right? We might realize that our knowledge of history is really limited, or maybe I know a lot about American history, but I haven't really learned that much about Latin American history. Or, there's spaces that I am going to be missing knowledge. So trying to figure out where those gaps in my knowledge are. So when students have questions about that, I can acknowledge what I'm missing and how I can do better. And then another thing I like to really think about when it comes to multiple perspectives is making space for brainstorming, giving students a lot of space to think new ideas, right? They might be putting out a lot of ideas about who is impacted by this, and maybe some of those aren't entirely correct or aren't perfect, but they're going to start that process for our students to think about who is involved in this moment in history, who is missing. Maybe, for example, when we talk about women's suffrage and the 19th Amendment, we get from students a lot this idea that, oh, when the 19th Amendment passed, all women were given the right to vote. I've seen that from students, I've seen that from teachers, I've seen that from judges. But if we think a little bit more critically about that, if we brainstorm about what else happened in history and what kind of voting issues exist today, we can think more about that there are people who are excluded from this story sometimes who don't get into that space, and that can be women of color or women who are incarcerated, right? When we think about the 19th Amendment, we remember that although it was a really important moment in history and it did a lot for a lot of women, there were also a lot of women who still had a long struggle ahead of them to be able to vote. And there are still women who struggle today with being able to access voting rights. So it's kind of making that space to ask critical questions and make space for brainstorming can really help us think about those multiple perspectives in our History Day projects. And then, kind of the final thing I like to tell people about multiple perspectives is the importance of wide research. To me, those two ideas are really connected. Researching widely can help students find multiple perspectives. If you're just looking at the Museum of American History, you might miss some of the things that come up in Latin American history or Native American history or African American history. So thinking about how can we go to those different museums or those different spaces to learn about different kinds of perspectives and different kinds of interpretations and experiences that happened in historical events. All right. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is how we clearly set those project goals. And I know I got into this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to go into it in a little bit more detail. So when we clearly set project goals, and that can happen, for example, like in the evaluations that we've got for History Day, but it can also happen in your classroom rubrics, in your introduction of the History Day program. Um, but basically, the idea of clearly setting those goals is it gives students a frame for peer editing, for self evaluation, and accepting feedback. It reminds us that students want to see what's expected of them, and when they're not meeting those expectations, why, or where is it lacking, where is it missing. And then when we get down to a contest level, or we get down to a community involvement level, it gives judges and community members clear standards for evaluating student projects and offering feedback more fairly. And it helps those judges and community members give specific and workable feedback to students, right? So hopefully it kind of setting these clear project goals, it helps kind of cut through some bias that might exist in judges or community members, right? It helps a judge might really love a topic, but if they have these clear examples of what the project's supposed to look like, even though they love the topic so much, they should be able to focus on what these clear examples set out, what these clear goals set out for them. And kind of when I'm talking about that, I also want to push toward rethinking judges. This is a process we're really working on at Maryland History Day. We're so excited to have judges involved. We are so excited to have community members work with our History Day students. Um, but we also want to push back a little bit to the idea of judging, right? We want to think about judges not just as the folks who decide the results of a competition or the results of a Maryland History Day contest, but we want to think about judges as History Day coaches, as mentors, as advocates for student work. They're the folks who really look closely at student work and give students feedback. And give students kind of a reminder that the community cares about their work, the community is interested in what they have to say, um, so they play this really important role in the History Day project and in that project-based learning process. So if you're hosting a school contest or working with a district contest, finding judges that represent your community and your student population is a great place to start. That's something that can really help give students more grounded feedback into their work, and help students really realize that there are adults who really want to hear about them. It's not just their teachers, it's not just their parents or their friends but it's really a broader community of people who care about the kind of work and the research they've done. And then when we find those folks, making sure to carefully train those judges to give kind, thoughtful, and helpful feedback, reminding judges to acknowledge and work to overcome their biases. So biases about maybe like historical topics they find really interesting and historical topics they find a little bit less interesting. Or instead of getting so bogged down in the grammar, really thinking more about that historical quality that we're asking judges to look into. And then at the same time, when we're asking judges to give that kind, thoughtful, and helpful feedback, reminding them that it's important to be specific. And I know I've kind of done this really quickly. There's so much to think about when it comes to judges and when it comes to evaluations from our community members. So I'd really encourage you to look more at the resources that Maryland History Day has on our website and in our teacher resources. I'll link to those at the end of this presentation and the end of this webinar, but it's something to really keep in mind, because I think there's a lot to really get into the details about how we think about judging, and how we think about getting our community involved in our History Day projects. And that kind of leads me to what I think is like the most fun way to get our community involved in History Day projects and in that project based learning process. And that's celebrating student work. Have fun with History Day, right? We want it to be a fun program for students. We want it to be something that students look back on fondly. Teachers and students work so hard on History Day projects and they deserve to be celebrated, right? We want to we want to show students that their work is really exciting and we're excited that they did it. We're excited that they put this much time and effort into it. And so sometimes the celebration can happen in the form of a school contest, right? Sometimes students get really excited about contests. They really want to be in this competitive environment. But it can take on a lot of other forms too, right? It can look like project showcases or maybe a mini History Day museum in your school. It can look like connecting with local institutions to share student projects. So maybe there's a local historical institution in your area that would be able to exhibit a showcase for a night, or maybe if you've got some students who are interested in presenting their projects even more, they would be able to partner with a local institution to share their project at an event or at an exhibit. Um, one of the things you can do if you've had a lot of documentaries come together is you can host a documentary night, right? Get popcorn, have students share their work, project it. It could even happen in the classroom as well, right? We can do project superlatives and student awards, things like most improved or best design or um, maybe best soundtrack, right? All those different kinds of ideas of ways we can celebrate student works um, that move us outside of just the contest or just the competition format. We can do peer-to-peer congratulations. So maybe we talk about peer-to-peer editing a lot, which is awesome and I think a really great tool to use in History Day. But we can also just do congratulations and say, hey, today let's focus on what we love about each other's projects. Let's share what students did really well. And, maybe everyone gets to write everyone else a note, or maybe we use Post-it notes, or maybe we present things online and give comments to each other that encourage our students and encourage our peers. And whenever possible to these kinds of events or these kinds of celebrations, it's awesome to get community members involved, parents, friends, other teachers, other classmates. Something that can be really awesome is if you're a school that's doing History Day for a couple of years. So maybe you've got your sixth graders do History Day, and so do your eighth graders. It can be really awesome to have those sixth graders get to experience their eighth graders cheering them on and celebrating the History Day projects that they've done. So there's all different kinds of ways we can think about that student celebration. And I just think it's important to remember that celebrating student work is really important. Maybe it's not just as important as evaluating it, right? Obviously, evaluating student work and giving students feedback is incredibly important. But celebrating student work is really what can make all the difference in that History Day project process. So I kind of ran through that, but thanks so much for participating. Um, I'm so excited to see more of how you do with your History Day projects in your classroom. Um, you can check out some more of our resources online. We've got, you can find the evaluation forms on National History Day's website, and you can find more stuff about judging, more stuff about celebrating student projects and organizing school contests at our Maryland History Day resources and also on our website. And of course, if you ever have any questions or you're ever looking for outreach or professional development, you're more than welcome to reach out to myself or my colleague Leah. We're more than happy to help. Awesome. Thanks so much. Have a great one.